Okay, so hello everybody. We're still waiting for a few more people to join us, but thank you for coming. In the meantime, I want to say thank you to our distant ed folks that help us to set up the Zoom meeting today, and to you, Jason, for taking care of us. So you're at the right place. If you're looking for a fanzines extravaganza today, and I hope you have a great day. It's a very nice weather outside, so we appreciate you being with us. And I just had to verify with Lois, when was it that we actually obtained the Lichtman collection, which is kind of a year right now. So this is really awesome. We have invested in this collection that is not the first collection of fanzines that we have here in the library. But definitely the most extensive one that we have. And as of that, we thought of having this conversation today with Phoenix and Pete to kind of celebrate the moment that we are having such an amazing collection here in Special Collections in Lehigh Libraries. So thank you for joining. We got a few folks coming in still. So the way that we're going to work, just to kind of let you all know, I'm going to say a few words. Lois Black, our Director of Special Collections, is going to say a few words. Then we're going to have a chat with Phoenix, Alexander, and Peter Balestrieri. I hope I said it correctly.
Really close.
Awesome. And then we're going to have some Q&A and some time for you to ask questions. So we hope to close the session around 6:30 or so. We'll see how it goes. If you have questions, please ask them using the Q&A button. And we met at least once, actually, because of this collection being really new in terms of scope and expertise needed here in the library to facilitate it. We talked, Lois and team in Special Collections talked several times with Phoenix and Peter about running such a collection, offering it to researchers, and it being integrated in the community. And thank you so much already for all the advice and good insight, Peter and Phoenix, on how to make the most out of it, which we always want to do. And like we also know that both are totally committed to this interest of ours that came to us sort of almost suddenly. The collection is of great interest to us, not just because it's creative and has a lot of art incorporated into it, and not only kind of commentary on, like, science fiction, but also a lot of personal interest by Lichtman, the other collectors that added to this fanzines corpus. So we're kind of thinking on a continuum, like having us as Lehigh, like really engage with technology, and for a long time, thinking about fanzines as like a community of interest around technology and the imaginary around it, and like visions of success and failures, I guess, of applying technology throughout the ages. So we are really, really excited about this one. And we're now thinking how to promote this collection within our community and beyond it. So this is a great start. Also, that's my opportunity to say thank you to the Friends of the Lehigh Libraries board members that tirelessly help us to come up with programs like this. And it's a group of volunteers that come, help us to achieve our goals here. So I very much appreciate you for doing this. So I think we may want to just start at this point because and if people join us later on, please do. So welcome again to the session about fanzines and science fiction collecting. If you're here, please do visit Linderman Library, where we have an exhibit that is dedicated to the fanzines collection. And there is an exhibit that is now coming. It's already started in the EWFM 6th floor south, where you can see some highlights from the collection as well. So please don't skip one or the other library. Go to two of them. And also many thanks to University Communication and NIA, especially for working with us on making this exhibit such an amazing exhibit and communication around it. So I will now introduce Lois Black, our Director of Special Collections, and from Lois, we'll get the chat going. So thanks everybody again. Lois, please.
Thank you, Boaz. In 2024, the Lehigh Library Special Collections acquired the Robert Lichtman Science Fiction Fanzine Collection and Archive. Robert Lichtman was a prolific publisher who devoted his life to producing and collecting science fiction fanzines. This extensive collection spans nearly a century, dating from the late 1930s through 2022, and features commentary, fan fiction, criticism, conference proceedings, and other genre. Along with the printed works, the archive includes correspondence, original art, and several fanzine titles personally published by Lichtman. Fanzines, or zines, as they are commonly referred to, may seem like an unusual choice for an institution such as Lehigh, whose traditional rare book collection is steeped in history. However, a previous gift of fanzines from alumnus Frank Looney revealed significant research interest in zines across the curriculum at Lehigh, and we determined that a science fiction fanzine collection would tie in nicely with collections rich in the history of science and technology. We expedited work on our newly acquired collection of fanzines. In the past year, the Library Special Collections team refined and enhanced Robert Lichtman's own inventory of approximately 15,000 zines, incorporated selected items into our instruction program, installed an exhibit, and again, the link is in the chat, so please do visit us virtually if you're not able to come to campus. But in addition to the exhibit, we've also rehoused much of the collection and made significant progress inventorying the remaining 5,000 science fiction fanzines. I'd like to acknowledge the work of Ilhan Sitak, Alex Jaffa, Eric Lours, Heather Simino, and Casey Keys in ensuring discoverability of the collection. We're now ready to offer programming about sci-fi fanzines and are glad to have you here today attending our first event. It is my great pleasure to introduce our two panelists this afternoon. I've learned a tremendous amount from them in recent months, and I hope you do too. Both Phoenix Alexander and Pete Balestrieri generously shared their experience as curators, writers, and fans of science fiction. Phoenix Alexander is the J.K. and Doris Klein Librarian for Science Fiction and Fantasy at the University of California, Riverside, where he curates one of the world's largest collections of cataloged science fiction. He is responsible for the development, stewardship, and promotion of the Eaton Collection of Science Fiction and Fantasy and associated collections of science fiction, fantasy, horror, and other forms of speculative fiction housed in Riverside Special Collections and University Archives Department. He is also the editor-in-chief of Vector, the journal of the British Science Fiction Association. Phoenix completed his PhD in the departments of English and African American Studies at Yale University and worked as a curatorial assistant at the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library. Prior to moving to Riverside, he was the Science Fiction Collections Librarian at the University of Liverpool. Phoenix is a published writer of science fiction himself, and his work has appeared in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, Black Static, and Safundi, the Journal of South African and American Studies and Science Fiction Studies. He is a full member of the Science Fiction Writers Association and served as a judge for the Arthur C. Clarke Award for 2021 and 2022. His research interests cover the intersections of librarianship and curatorial practice, speculative fiction, and social justice. His work is informed by the question of how archives can serve as literary home places for marginalized creators who have been historically undervalued and those whose work has had to take on new and innovative forms for recognition. Peter Balestrieri is curator, science fiction and popular culture collections, and associate curator, Iowa Archives of the Avant-Garde for Special Collections and Archives at the University of Iowa Main Library. He received his MLS, his Master's of Library Science degree from the University of Iowa, and his Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I can't help but note that we have a celebrity in our midst. Prior to becoming a librarian, Pete was a professional musician and international recording artist who played saxophone in the ghostly trio in the punk rock band Violent Femme, who earned a gold record in 1983. He toured with the band for over a decade, performing in venues around the world. Please join me in a warm virtual welcome to our two panelists. And I believe, Pete, you'll be starting us off.
Yeah, so I think like we want to start. Thank you, Lois. Like why do you like your job? Tell us more about it. So Peter, can you start with that and
Sure.
then to your family? Thank you.
My life has been just one incredibly lucky break after another, and somebody's always looking out for me, either living or dead or in some other realm. So as a fairly old man in my late 50s, after having a variety of different careers, I actually had my current position created for me, and have just had so much fun. So I love it because I have an incredible amount of freedom. As a curator, I have almost complete control over my collections and adding to them, creating new collections, and I just have so much fun all the time. And fandom and fanzines, science fiction fanzines, that's how I began my career, and processing the close to 600 boxes of the Haviland collection. And, that was 13 years ago, and I'm still having a lot of fun, and new things come in every day. I hear about new things. I'm offered new things every day from collectors, from people finding things in secondhand stores, basements, attics. So I think I love it because it keeps changing all the time. There's always something new. And because of the freedom that I have to pursue the intellectual directions that I'm led into, pushed into, etc.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Phoenix, we have a maximum of 10 minutes, but you can go for as long as you want about this one.
Oh, okay. We just want to say, first of all, thank you so much for asking us here, to all the organizers and to attendees. And yeah, I agree with Pete. My career path has also been a series of lucky breaks and taken some quite chaotic turns. So I initially trained as a fashion designer, and then went into academia, and then discovered special collections, which I didn't know about at all until I was in grad school. And then fell in love with the variety of work that goes into it. Like Pete was saying, you acquire materials, you meet with donors, you teach classes, you do exhibits, outreach events like this, talks. And I think, well, backing up a little bit, so how I got into this current role was through like an academic specialism. So I needless to say, as I'm sure many of us are here in the audience and on the panel, I was a nerdy kid growing up. Always loved science fiction, video, the fantastic video games, all of that stuff. Um, and then it wasn't until later when I went to college that I sort of started to connect that passion for the fantastic, right, into thinking, okay, well, what could I do as like an actual career from this? Um, and I got back into it by reading a sort of an umbrella course at Queen Mary University of London, which um, was basically on post-colonial literature. So it gathered texts and authors from a fairly wide geographic pool to analyze sort of each week. And one thing I was really noticing was some of the very innovative forms that some writers would adopt. Um, I'm thinking in particular somebody like Jamaica Kincaid, who you wouldn't think of as a science fiction writer. Um, but I was so interested with how she used language. Um, I was interested in a text like The Palm Wine Drinkard, which tries to adapt, a Nigerian writer to a Nigerian narrative into the sort of the form of the novel, a Western construction. And I kind of got back into speculative fiction, science fiction that way. Um, and and this is sort of true to my approach now to science fiction in that it's very expansive. But to fast forward a little bit, when I was doing research in grad school, and I found out about academic libraries and primary sources, basically whereby you could go to a collection somewhere like Beinecke or the Huntington or Iowa or UCR or Liverpool and actually find these amazing uh, resources, historical documents that allowed you to sort of go as deep as you wanted into a specific historical period and literary period. Um, and I think one of the pleasures of this job is that it's a really good mix of introversion and extroversion. I think it requires those two different kinds of personas. So, um, a lot of my job is sort of in my office with books, processing them, filling in spreadsheets, doing that kind of thing, which might sound really boring to people, but I actually find it quite zen. And then at other times, you have to be outgoing with it. You have to talk and present and give classes and really just to raise awareness of what we have and what you can do with it. Um, so I would say that was my summary. And I'll turn it back to you, Pete, if you wanted to add anything or.
No, you covered a lot of the things that I forgot to say. And I
It's
I
all good.
do I do those kinds of things as well. And again, the variety, and I especially liked what you said about introvert and extrovert. And I go back and forth all the time about which one am I, and which one is the most authentic. And I think it's too late in my life anyway for that, uh, because there is a huge difference between setting up a pop-up exhibit in the first floor of the library, a huge student traffic area, uh, and sitting in my office for hours
Mm,
comparing donor offerings against current holdings,
hmm
just to try to see if I'm being offered duplicates or not.
hmm
So having to be prepared to do both kinds of things, yeah, absolute necessity, but lots of fun, lots of
hmm
fun. Yeah.
But let's get closer to the collection. So you both run a very large collection of science fiction and speculative fiction and all those really interesting genres, and also a fanzines collection. So what do you think? What can scholars learn from the collection and scholars and enthusiastic people, communities, from this particular collection that we have here. So maybe we'll start with you this time, Phoenix, and then we'll go to you, Peter.
Sure. So fanzines represent a really comprehensive overview, I would say. Comprehensive, but there's a caveat to that, in that they really reward a deep dive into the actual pages. And I see already that the virtual exhibit that you've you've put together is so great in giving a sort of thematic breakdown of some key areas that the fanzines cover that actually provide some digitized issues for folks to look at, which is fantastic. But I think with something as large as the Lichtman archive, which is such an amazing acquisition, so kudos to you at the library. You can find histories of science fiction fandom that and we talked about this in an earlier conversation, but the pipeline from folks being fans and growing up reading science fiction to then becoming science fiction authors, and then writing into editors at certain journals, or writing to one another and sharing, great texts they've read, or authors they think are really exciting, and then to go on to become full-fledged science fiction writers themselves. And I think obviously pre-internet days, fanzines were sort of really handmade or hand printed by community members and mailed to one another, and inside them you'd find a membership list, you'd find addresses of folks, you'd find upcoming events, details of that, which you might not find anywhere else. And that was such an important way of creating a community, not just within the US, but really sort of worldwide. And within that, and again within a collection as expansive as the Lichtman, which is 108 boxes I saw, that, what did you say, what was something like that? You'll find particular titles that speak to a specific type of fandom. So again, the categories you have on the virtual exhibit are fantastic. So, you can see early fanzines, you can see international fanzines, social commentary, and that kind of preparatory work, I would say, that gives researchers an inroad into such a vast collection is really revolutionary, because particularly if you have researchers, whether they're local or whether they've come from abroad, they might only have a few days or a week, or if they're lucky, a few weeks with a certain collection. And so imagine if you're a researcher and you have these hundreds of titles to look through. Having those access points to sort of guide research is really, really important. I see in the description, I'm cheating a bit because I have the description of the Lichtman archive to one side, but things like the Philip K. Dick Society newsletter, that's amazing. You'll have a complete run of that in there. Folks can have a study of that. And within that, you could take research into cyberpunk. You could take research into, the effects of technology and or psychedelics in that particular period. You could take it into underground culture, punk. So even from that little sliver of one specialism, one title in the Lichtman, you can really have such an expansive direction in terms of research. And I could ramble on for ages, but I want to stop and give Pete a chance to say something about fanzines.
No, that's fine. I agree 100%. I think that going forward, everyone that has collections, and I know your collection, Phoenix, our collection, too large, and I have for that kind of work to be comprehensive. But I have begun that effort in terms of identifying content and themes within individual fanzines, and there are online resources that can help with that. Things like the Science Fiction Encyclopedia, or the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction, a great online resource. And by searching for things like, for instance, technology or future war or something like that, you will get these explanations of those kinds of themes, the history of them within science fiction, and then very often they will identify titles of fanzines, of short stories, of novels that fit that theme. So that's, I think, I agree with Phoenix. That's just absolutely the way forward, if possible, to making these accessible. At Iowa, the very first con that I went to, I think, was Lone Con in San Antonio in 2014. And I met so many important older fanzine editors, publishers, people involved with the archiving of the history of science fiction fandom, and one of them was Rich Lynch, the editor of Mimosa, and I'm not sure, but you may have issues of Mimosa in the Lichtman, and I asked Rich, what is it that the science fiction fan community wants? What is it that you want more than anything from archives? And obviously, he's a fanzine editor, so there's that. But his response to me was digitize the fanzines, digitize as many fanzines as you can. So we began that effort in 2014 to go ahead and start digitizing the 1930 to 1950 section of the Heblen fanzines. And before the librarian that was hired to perform that work quit, we got about 800, close to 800 fully digitized. And then there was a voluntary transcription program that was begun. And so every single one of those, I think it's 780 some science fiction fanzines from 1930 to 1950 in that range, fully transcribed now, every single one of them. So that again makes them all word searchable. So whatever titles you're interested in, if we have them, they're also transcribed and word searchable, which is another boon to researchers trying to locate either specific authors' names or different ideas. And I'd have to again agree with so many of the things that Phoenix said. Community, of course, is one of the big ones, and uh, uh, when you actually decide to start reading fanzines, which I did at the very beginning of my job here, and read fanzines for almost 6 months straight, and it's an amazing world, and as I saw what the fanzines look like, as you imagine people creating stencils and then using mimeograph machines, farther back we go, hectograph, jelly prints, ditto machines, and you see that it's tiny numbers of people, and only 40 copies of a fanzine could be made from a hecto stencil, maybe 85, 90 to 100 copies with a good mimeo stencil. As the small numbers of who's doing all this and spreading all this and attending these conventions, as that begins to sink in, and then you think to yourself, well, wait a minute, these are some of the biggest names in science fiction. For the decades that followed their teenage participation in science fiction fandom, then you begin to realize that there is an incredible history and an incredible relationship between the science fiction fan community and the professional world of science fiction authors. And that history and all of the different aspects of world culture that it touches on over a period of many, many decades. Yeah, that's what makes all of that, I think, so important.
Definitely. And just to build on what Pete says, all of those amazing printmaking techniques, they actually lend fanzines really well to teaching with. So for instance, you can show students or researchers, the various titles, but then you might, for instance, do a fanzine making workshop with students where you introduce, particularly younger generations to these kinds of analog media, for want of a better word. And similarly, the kinds of illustrations that you see in fanzines, whether they're amateur illustrations or, by folks who go on to become professionals, just like any kinds of artwork in science fiction, in print science fiction, it's such a interesting that they make such interesting texts for cultural analysis. What kinds of readerships are they appealing to? What kinds of jokes are they making? Do you see a little figure that somebody might have designed, make its way across the years in various iterations across titles? So again, just sort of speaking to that breadth and depth of research you can do with fanzines.
Because we sort of gained a little time with the first question, I'll ask here something we talked about. And Peter, you just talked about, digitization and the first request that the community is interested in is digitizing those fanzines. And while we're talking, there is this all kind of individual subjective, like the annotation that is specific for one person. Can you talk a little bit about like the dynamic, the privacy, the, like the correspondence between 2 or 40 people and then making it public? And like, I know that, like there are different variations on how to make those items available to the public.
Sure,
Like if you
sure.
can kind of, thank you.
Yeah. What's so interesting for me is especially when people tell me, oh, there's going to be correspondence. There's a lot of correspondence in this collection. And I get very excited. And then the collection comes to us. And really a lot of the correspondence says, please send me the next 3 months of your fanzine. I'm enclosing 75 cents. And that's it. And there's no discussion of science fiction, and there's no personalities are revealed, and we have and it has been digitized, but it is not online. The Dan McPhail collection of correspondence. So that correspondence is with every major name in science fiction, both professionally and these were all people who were writing in the pulps. And then also all the biggest names in fandom. Dan McPhail was a high school student in Oklahoma who started his own fanzine and then just began to reach out to this world. So we purchased the collection of his correspondence. And again, I was hoping, I was hoping for, some juicy letters of one kind or another. And most of them are transactional. They're just, yeah, we're sending you some money, or somebody writes in and says, you're doing a great job. I really liked your fanzine. Good luck. And it might be coming from somebody like Frederick Pohl. Well, Frederick Pohl, an enormous name in early science fiction, but there isn't much meat to that. So is there any kind of a danger in putting that online? Well, Fred is dead, and Dan McPhail is gone, and I just can't imagine anybody worrying about these letters that really don't say much of anything. Now, on the other hand, you do find letters in the collections of people, either donations or purchases, and that's why it's great to have a curator in place who can look at that material and make a judgment as to whether this letter has something to do with the major theme of their collection, or is it somehow something straight out of their personal life that has nothing to do with the rest of their collection, perhaps does lend some insight to who they were as human beings. But we're talking about science fiction collectors and science fiction fans. And in many ways, the collection isn't about them. It's about their passion. So I wouldn't even try to digitize a letter like that. I might not want to even include letters of an extremely personal nature in the collection. I may want to try to return those to the donor, see what the donor would like done with them. And that's something that is going on all the time. But in terms of digitization, I know that a lot of people have differing ideas about this, and there are a lot of things involved, both legal and you mentioned privacy. There may be people, especially from media fandom, not so much from older literary science fiction fandom, but from media fandom, everything from the middle 60s on in terms of television and film. They often were writing material that they did not want to take credit for. They created pseudonyms that they could hide behind. And I think that all of that kind of privacy needs to be maintained. I would never want to, I think, connect their pseudonymous names to their real names. That's something for them to decide, not for me as a curator to decide. In terms of copyright and things of that nature, when it became time to digitize those close to 800 science fiction fanzines that we had here at Iowa, we submitted the entire thing to our legal department, to the university's legal department, and the university's legal department came back with a decision of go ahead, digitize, and put everything online. And so we did. And we have never had a takedown order. We had one communication from someone formerly connected to a pretty historical fanzine. They asked us not to put that online, and I complied with that. And so that one won't be going online. But that's only one in 11 years. So I think that it's probably true, at least especially of the older fanzines, that people don't have to worry too much about the copyright law. We're also all educational institutions. Fair use comes into play. We're only putting these online for purposes of research. No one's trying to make any money off of this. And I think, am I getting at what you were wondering about, Boaz?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Phoenix, what do you think? Anything to add to this, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such an amazing project. And I must confess that we at UCR are a bit more behind in terms of digitizing our fanzines. But we are exploring some access, like online access options via a virtual reading room or that kind of thing. But I think maybe in the future I want to be inspired by Iowa's approach and make the case. Now the problem with that for us, and Pete kind of alluded to this, Iowa, UCR have massive collections. I've been in the role for 2.5 years, coming up to 3 years now. Obviously, the collection started way before my time and my tenure here. But the fanzines currently are over 300,000 and split across various collections. So it's almost, we've got a lot of organizational work to do for the physical copies, but and before we can make the kinds of resources that you already have at Lehigh with your virtual exhibit, which is to say that it's so great that you're doing these kinds of events and doing having these kinds of conversations early in the collection, because that way from its genesis, if you do or however you do go on to build from the Lichtman archive, you will have a sort of intellectual framework, an infrastructural framework in place to really make the most of it in the ways that we've both been talking about. But another thing to think about, and really this is just a segue for me showing you this particular fanzine I have here, and relating to sort of privacy and concerns, you might have fanzines that relate to a particular franchise, like an intellectual property, and so that for us at least would be the Kirk Spock collection, which for those of you who don't know, it's an example of a slash fanzine, which is basically fan fiction, where fans of a particular show or book series write romantic stories about characters in a franchise. Usually without the blessing, of course, of whoever owns the rights to it. And so I have to show you this cover, which is outrageous. It's safe for work, don't worry. We've called him Sexy Spock. He's room to hire 20. And this is an example of one of the fanzines in the Kirk Spot collection. Now, obviously, if we put that online, probably Paramount would be very cross with us. And we get the Roddenberry estate come and be cross with us too. But so some of the treasures, like, so some things like Pete was saying, with those kinds of relationships with the writers or a particular franchise or donor, yeah, you keep those offline. But that was an excuse to show that because we love that. And we table with that particular item, and students and anybody walking past really gets a kick out of like, oh, is that Leonard Nimoy with long hair and in a biker jacket? So just fun stuff like that. But yes, we've got work to do for our digitization at UCR for sure.
And I don't know about the studio, but Roddenberry wouldn't care. Roddenberry famously, in more than one place, wrote that he was a bit confused by Star Trek fandom in the beginning, but then he quickly realized that all these things that were being done were expressions of love.
Yes.
And that he was 100% behind them. And I believe it's in the very first paperback that came out that included fan fiction. And so those authors all immediately became pros with the publication of that book. I think it's called New Voyages. And in the foreword, Roddenberry tells the story of his relationship with fandom, and then says, now that I understand that all these things are creations of love, use anything you want. Use my world, use my characters, use their real names, do whatever you want because I understand. Very, very different than Lucas's attitude towards slash fic. But that's another that's another story. And Phoenix is right. As you begin to see, we have acres of slash fiction, and some of this fan art is extraordinary, both in its conceptual approach to the material, but then also in terms of just the quality of the artwork. Sometimes the quality of the artwork is just breathtaking, and then you realize, yes, and all amateurs, no one getting paid, everything for free. It's extraordinary. It really is. This whole world, and yeah.
Lois, I know we talked a little bit about those things ourselves, and it's so reassuring to have you around, Peter and Phoenix, because that kind of confirms some of our ideas, I think. Do you want to say something about our approach, differences, if any, and what you're thinking about digitization? I know that we started.
Yes, I'd be happy to. I have up-to-the-minute reporting that indicates that we have about 10 titles published by Robert Lichtman himself that have already been digitized. We have approximately 281 issues ready to go and be published online. Our understanding is that we have permission from Lichtman's family, his descendants, to publish them to the web. We look forward to making them available and facilitating access. It'll be a while, though, at this rate, before we're able to complete digitization of, as I think was noted earlier, 108 cartons of material. Thanks.
I think that's excellent. And the fact that both Phoenix and I are overseeing these really, really enormous collections. What you're doing is, I think, in the future, what I will do and what I imagine Phoenix will do as well. And that is to not attempt what we did at first here, which was to take a span of years and then to try to digitize every issue of every title within that span of years. The reason I say that is because it's just not as important as it was because of FANAC, capital F, capital A-N-A-C, FANAC, which is the Fan Volunteer Fan History Preservation Society that has over 25,000 fanzines completely digitized and online. So it becomes less and less important because they just keep going. So it becomes less and less important to try to digitize everything from these enormous collections. It makes a lot more sense to think about specific titles or specific themes of content. It's the Lichtman collection. So doing Lichtman zines makes so much good sense. And by working in that sort of niche way, accomplishing something that, again, is going to be a boon to researchers and not necessarily just a shotgun effect. In the future, I'm not sure that we'll ever renew the digitization of Heavlin fanzines. What will continue to happen, though, are the digitization and perhaps not even putting them online, but the digitization in terms of preservation of niche parts of the collections that can then be leveraged for not just research, but classes and student inquiries, exhibits, events, etc.
Great. That's great advice. Thank you. So now we're kind of going back to the history and scope. You know, like fanzines go back to the 30s or so, and science fiction goes much back than that. What do you see as changes in the genre, in the evolution of the genre, you know, like, and the role that fanzines played in that evolution? So like, where did it pick up and what stuff did it help make? It's a big question, I know, but we wanted that too. Who wants to go for that one? Phoenix.
Don't mind. Okay. Sure. Well, yeah, two parts to that question. So, yeah, the history of science fiction. I mean, how long is a piece of string? You could say it started with the Copernican Revolution. You can say it started with 17th century, fantasy texts. 1818, Frankenstein, Mary Shelley is considered to be a sort of early example of how we understand science fiction as a genre that responds to specific technological advancements and extrapolates a narrative from them. You then have, things like the Industrial Revolution, modernism, colonialism, colonial expansion, scientific romance, whereby as you approach the turn of the century, authors are trying to again engage with technology and imagining societal development. But fanzines, I think if I were to sort of generalize, and Pete, feel free to jump in, I would say that whereas early right to say pre 19th century, the further back you go, writing and reading is considered sort of a purview of the wealthy or the, I guess, empowered class in some way. The Margaret Cavendish's The Blazing World from 1666 was an early woman authored example of what we call science fiction or speculative fiction now. But she was a noblewoman, she was a landowner, she was wealthy. And I think as science fiction developed as a genre as we know it, say early 20th century, with something like Amazing Stories in 1926 and Hugo Gernsback's work, editorship, it became a way for folks to sort of enter into a creative sphere where they might not have been welcome before, might not have been possible to, sort of democratizing authorship in some ways. And it's interesting to note that the first issue of Amazing Stories gathered a lot of famous authors, like Jules Verne translation, H.G. Wells, I think Edgar Allan Poe's in there. But I think there was one, I can't remember, there's one or two news stories, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Pete. But then the magazine goes on to publish, amateur authors or, authors who would go on to become bigger names.
Yeah.
And I think fanzines capture that democratic effort in that sense, that history of who can write and who is listened to. And then as it develops, like I sort of talked about earlier, the way I describe it to students is almost like it's Reddit before Reddit. So if you watch a
Yeah.
movie, you might go online and on a specific subreddit and say, okay, what's, r/horror? What are some good horror movies people have been watching? Or the fanzines are a way of doing that. You might create I want to voice my opinion on this particular book that's come out, and I'm going to write it out, print it, and circulate it among my friends. And you can be part of a conversation about the art. And I think this is where you start to get the relationship between fandom and creators. And it's not always a happy relationship, as Pete can attest to. Who was it? Was it Damon Knight that famously wrote a letter to A.E. Van Vogt? It was The World of Null E, I think. And he basically really hated the book. He said, "What? This is really trash." And he mentioned Van Vogt mentions it in a foreword to a later edition of that title and said, Damon Knight really took me to task for this book, and he was kind of right. And I'm glad that I inspired him to go on and then have a career in science fiction. So you kind of see those kinds of histories being made possible in the era of fanzines in the 20th century. Pete, feel free to jump in. That was a
So,
very sort of clunky
no, that's such
history
a great
of.
story. That's such a great story. And Damon Knight is the mentee of Doc Lowndes, Robert A. Doc Lowndes. And Doc Lowndes becomes the editor of I don't know how many different pulp magazines, and then also a publisher at one point. But it's Doc Lowndes who really early on in the 30s begins to see that it isn't just that there's a prejudice against science fiction in terms of academia and fine literature. It's that there's a prejudice against all genre literature. So it's Doc Lowndes who says nothing is going to accomplish what we want, which is for this literature to be taken seriously until we can begin to apply the rules of literary criticism to the work. We can't just be at this grade school book report level where the fanzines are filled with, oh, what a great story that was, and I liked it so much. We're going to have to somehow move beyond that. And it's Damon Knight. Doc Lowndes impresses this on Damon Knight, that Damon Knight needs to become a critic, not just critical, but has to become a serious literary critic. And over, a long stretch of time, he accomplishes that and is one of those people that advances the importance of science fiction little by little across those decades. This is the kind of thing of teenagers start out in the fanzines become sort of homemade versions of the pulp magazines that they're writing. And really, I don't think anyone's more important than Hugo Gernsback to the evolution of science fiction fandom, because in Amazing Stories, like Phoenix just said, he begins by saying, here's the beginning of this new genre that doesn't exist, that has no name. And Verne and Wells are part of this, but here are some original stories that I think you'll enjoy. And it's not like these kinds of stories, especially scientific romances, it's not like they haven't been appearing in other pulp magazines since the turn of the century. And then especially in British boys magazines as well. It's so important, the British boys magazines and everything that happened there. And so, Gernsback creates the first totally science fiction magazine. That's Amazing Stories. Then he decides, oh, I'm getting a lot of letters from fans. I should have a letter column. So now Amazing Stories gets a letter column. Then he says, all these fans, wouldn't it be great if they all wrote to each other and were telling each other to keep buying Amazing? So then he publishes their addresses with their letters, and now the fans start writing to each other. And Gernsback, he's a genius, he's a great entrepreneur. Then he decides, oh, I'm going to start the very first science fiction club, Science Fiction League, and it's a national club. And the idea is that whatever city you're in, you'll get together with other science fiction fans who you've identified through the magazine, and you'll start a chapter of Science Fiction League. And now in all of these major cities and small cities across the country, he has the fans coming together to talk about how important it is to buy the next issue of Amazing. And then they're going to spend more time creating a fanzine, and in that fanzine, it's everything Phoenix said. They're going to write reviews of the stories. They're going to suggest other stories in other magazines. They're going to suggest books. And then as the 30s go on and we get into the late 30s and early 40s, they're going to start talking about films. So it's, yeah, I totally forgot the question.
Oh no, you totally answered it. I was the little tidbit kind of that I still like in our conversation just a few days ago, like there was this kind of evolution right now of the genre too, like it's more speculative fiction, less named science fiction. And, like I was just thinking about, me going to the bookstore and just expecting that science fiction is going to be where usually I would find it, but actually that's not the case anymore. So kind of, like, I guess like it can really be a good lead to the next question, which was like the community, like talking more, like about those connections as they are right now, and like in what way, the authors and the publishers and all of that, like who's identified as the community, at this point, and like what are the perspective, about those changes? We talked about the beginning, and like where is that activity right now? Thank you.
Well, fandom has never been fandom has never stood still. And in the past, when fandom talked about being, and when I say the past, I mean the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, when fandom talked about being inclusive, it wasn't always inclusive. It said that it was, it believed that it was, but over a stretch of time, there are terrible incidents relating to homophobia, to sexism. I mean, it is a microcosm. And so what the society was like in any given decade, that's what fandom was like in that decade. And so I think that the 70s is definitely a period, and especially the new wave. I mean, as soon as we begin to talk about the new wave in science fiction, and everyone that was the beginning of a huge sort of door being opened up that let all kinds of things in that hadn't been there before. And I would say that sexuality became more of an issue, psychedelics, all kinds of different ideas and things came in. And then there was also a lot more women coming into a science fiction fandom. You had a lot more people of color interested in science fiction. But it's taken a really long time to bring fandom up to this level where I believe it is fulfilling the promise that has always been there. And I'm not trying to be hypercritical in any way. I'm just trying to be historical. And so I think that science fiction fans would say we would have welcomed anyone who showed up. Anyone who showed up at the con would have been welcome. But I know that there's too much history to the effect that sometimes was not true. And now now we're in another period of regrowth, both for the genre and for fandom. And what that's meant is, again, the doors opening up. And fandom has always been about fighting. It's always been about arguments and you know, you put two fans together and you've got an argument. Put three arguing fans together and you've got a convention.
A convention.
And I think what we're experiencing now to some extent, and have been for quite a few years, because we could go back to Sad Puppies and Rabid Puppies and the world cons that were affected by that, and say that there is a graying, and this phrase is not my phrase, there is a graying of fandom going on right now, and that is closing down or limiting a lot of small regional conventions. And it's also changing things like Worldcon a lot. And I honestly believe with all my heart that that's the way it has to be. And that the future of the genre and the future of fandom belongs to a much bigger, more inclusive family that will bring the people who have always been on the margins into the bosom of the whole thing and embrace them in a way that says, we have always been committed to fresh ideas and fresh concepts and a scientific way of looking at the world that ignores prejudice and that ignores discrimination and that embraces facts and an imagination that's open, not an imagination that's closed.
You know, Phoenix, well, I'll just jump to the next question, last one in this way. If you can talk a little bit about the technological aspect, and like kind of thinking, you know, like what Peter is now describing, you know, like where the new means to create fanzines, to have that debate, conversation slash conference slash argument. And like, what do you like? How do we? What do we do? What do you do to interact with those new manifestations of this community? And you know, as a librarian as well, obviously, like
Yeah.
you know, and talk a little bit about the dynamic that is not easy, you know.
Sure. Great question. But I just before I do that, I just want to say one thing from what Pete just
Sure.
said was so gorgeous and true. And specifically the fact that people have always been there. You know, this all of these pick any marginalization you want. Oh, this is a new phenomenon. No, it isn't. We've always been here. It's just that folks haven't been recognized or there hasn't been a language for it. So yeah, I just found that very moving what you said, Peter. So I'll stop there for that one. But with one more thing, I just thought I always say there's another thing I always say to students. Science fiction, I feel, is in some ways the most nakedly political of all genres, despite its reputation, as Pete was saying, of the history of boys' adventure stories, juvenilia, that kind of thing that it came out of. Yes, it can still entertain. Yes, it can still provide pleasure. But I think that history that you charted for us, Pete, about the call for authors to become critics as well, allows you to allows folks to use science fiction with a more nuanced lens. Yes, get entertainment, yes, get fun, but also think about what kinds of technologies power spaceships. What is the economy like in this world? What is the ecology? Who, you know, how is society structured in terms of class, in terms of sexuality, race, etc.? Where does food come from? Science fiction really has all these, again, multivalent entry points into more comprehensive and in-depth research, as well as readings and interpretations. Anyway, I'll stop there. But technology, yes. So a lot of the conversations you see among fans, creators, etc. now happens online. We have, obviously things like Discord, things like Slack, social media, that's become fragmented as people in recent years have moved away from Twitter and onto things like Blue Sky, Instagram and Facebook and so on. And from a librarian or archival perspective, it can be sometimes hard to sort of chronicle that. The great thing about fanzines and letters from the 20th century, physical media is that, yes, obviously paper degrades and you have to preserve and you can digitize, but there's something material to collect and work with. But whereas if you have things like even emails, there are email archival software that softwares that are available now for libraries. But then again, the question becomes one of access. How do we, we've archived an author's emails, right? And then how are they comfortable with researchers accessing them while they're still living? How will that access change in 10, 20 years when the technology is now obsolete, the format's now obsolete? And so thinking as long term as it's possible for one human being, I guess, in a role, assuming you stay in the job forever, because again, in any kinds of library or archive, you could stay, I could stay the rest of my life here in 60 years, and there'll be something happens in 70 years that like, oh, I'm not here because somebody else is going to have to deal with it, um, that kind of thing. Probably a bit less than 60 years, actually, if I'm lucky. But so I think. And I love what you said earlier, Pete, about this was in relation to digitizing fanzines, right? Given the scale of text, given the amount of formats that are out there, it's swiftly becoming impossible in the age of the internet to try and capture everything of fandom, right? Capture everything of an author. So then it becomes a question of, well, okay, so you have a still living author who is, wanting to donate their materials, a lot of which are born digital, which is fancy library way of saying they don't exist on paper. They're emails, they're Word documents, they're digital files. What is like a sort of core collection of manuscripts that we can see, of emails that they might be willing to share, of certain DMs, we have to use our imaginations, DMs from any kind of media platform, tweets, posts, blog posts, and maybe build a kind of not exhaustive, but sort of I'm trying to think of a word here.
Like a cloud.
Yeah, kind of, but like a curated collection of
Right.
selected important items or texts from an author's work. Because, yeah, given the scale of things, given, as you mentioned, Lois, the time it takes even to try and attempt to digitize, physical collections, let alone try and aggregate and organize and make a platform for online materials. It could take several lifetimes. And then also I think, and the last thing I'll say about this is that at some point it's knowing what to hold on to and what to let go of. So for instance, in authors Slacks, Slack has a function where, messages are erased after 30 days. And as a librarian, for me, it's like, well, or people might nuke their accounts. They might have been posting for years on Twitter, really wonderful Twitter threads of this, that, and the other, and then they decide to move platform or something like that. The platform might go obsolete. And the cheesy quote from Blade Runner, all these things will be lost like tears in the rain.
Yeah.
There's that kind of, at some point, it's like, well, that's okay. Does that sound blasphemous to say? Pete, or Boaz
No,
or
that's right
Lois,
on. That's right on.
because you just can't, you just can't collect everything and you can't preserve everything. And so then the question of what to preserve and how to make it available, I think is pressing. I'll stop there. That sounded pretty grandiose.
But that's the reason for something that's so big as this is. That's the reason to have curators, to make those decisions and to come up with representative collections rather than completist collections.
That's the word I was looking for, representative. Yeah.
The idea that we collect, and so because we collect, whether it's rare books and medieval manuscripts or fanzines, we are collectors and we are implicit in the trade of whatever those things are. But we can't collect with the typical collector psychology. We're librarians, and we need to be asking ourselves all the time, how much is too much? What's representative? Is there some important reason for us to try to get every book by this author, every issue of this fanzine, or can one good solid collection of 108 boxes be a representative collection, and then you have the other collection as well? You can certainly keep collecting. There's no reason not to. But again, making those decisions all the time, as Phoenix just said, do we keep it? Do we not take this? Do we, and then using your best judgment as to what's going to satisfy the needs of your institution and all the rest of that. I know that, you know, here everything is moving backwards from that completist attitude to something that's much more focused, much narrower, and hopefully will be ultimately more successful as a resource rather than just a bragging right or something like that. There's nothing that, you know, I can do, and there's nothing that Phoenix can do about things that were here already when we got into our positions. But we can certainly do a lot to influence and decide what's going to come in from now on. So that's something that I think, and Phoenix and I have been in on other panels where we've spent a lot of time trying to talk about collectors, what collectors can do with their big collections, and who should they talk to, and that's the subject for another whole panel.
Yeah. Well, we have one question like that coming from the audience, so
Oh.
so let's do it.
Phoenix is going to answer it.
Okay. So
Go for it.
is asking, so how does one approach a living author collector about their collection?
Oh,
And can it be proactive instead of reactive process? So, you know, can you talk a little bit about that, in particular in that context of like, we're not looking for the broad map of things, but we're looking for particulars, you know, and how do you approach those things now?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and yeah, that's exactly part of the role of the job that me and Pete have, is to sort of approach still living authors, and with the idea of, you know, suggesting, you know, our institutions or institutions that might be more suitable. And I think, yeah, the first question is, what kinds of collections do we have? What kinds of people would fit? Or, you know, start local, you know, are there local authors? Are there, you know, authors who have relations to other authors within our collection and who might want to keep their papers or manuscripts in the same place? And again, it's that targeted, I don't like the word targeted, but selective, you know, we're not going to just a scattershot email across, oh, this author, you know, come and give your papers. Because for some authors, it doesn't make sense for their work to come to Riverside or to Iowa or to Texas A&M,
exactly.
you know. So I think doing your research, not just with your own collection, but then sort of a donor or an author, you know, that you'd like to contact. And then I always say, you know, keep it short and keep it cute. If you're doing an email, just say, hello, a couple of sentences. I'm so and so from Lehigh University. We have mention a few of the highlights of your collection. So the Lichtman Archive, and we specialize, you know, we serve a, you know, science and engineering community, etc. Give them a few sentences about why, you know, the place would be suitable for their collection, and you have to court them a bit and say, you know, your papers would be a wonderful addition to build on what we already have. And then, you know, if of interest, please write back to me, and then leave it at that. And sometimes you'll get a quick reply, sometimes you won't get any reply. Sometimes you'll get a reply 6 months. But what you can do, I think, and I only do this once. I think I'll leave it a few months, 3 to 6 months. And if I haven't heard anything, I might send one follow-up. Again, the same thing, and then leave it at that, because you do not want to be going around like a used car salesman. And then again, in person, if you go to conventions, you know, if you have, as Pete's saying, a dedicated curator in place, it's important to go to where the authors are, where the fans are,
where the community is.
The community, exactly. So take your business card and say, hello, I'm from so-and-so university. Love to chat to you more about, you know, have you thought about a home for your materials? contact me if you're interested. And an online resource that I always recommend that you can send to folks is the Legacy Kit from the SFWA, which I'll drop the link in the chat to here. And
Yeah.
it just sort of gives you a very quick sort of whistle-stop tour about how to organize, how to prepare your materials. Because as Pete was saying, that's a whole other conversation we can have about advising people who want to donate materials,
Right.
how to
Right.
best prepare it. So
Yeah.
that's what I'd say.
And-
Pete,
and-
feel free to
As I
That's
asked
add.
that question, I was like, just making sure. If you're listening to this and you have a great fanzines collection, we want to know about it. So, like, this is my quick kind of, like, please let us know, or come to us and see what's here.
Mhm.
Pete,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, I'm so glad you did that, because this is exactly what Phoenix is talking about. And my experience and my methods are identical to Phoenix's. I mean, if other people are working in other ways, I'm not aware of it. For me, I can give you an example. Worldcon St. Louis 2018, 2019, I can't remember now, but I went to that con, and for years, not for the last few years, but for years, Iowa always had its own table in the fan area right near Fanac and First Fandom, one of the oldest of the fan organizations. And I would sit at that table sometimes, 5 or 6 hours a day at a Worldcon. And I went to that con announcing that I wasn't interested in trying to take in the papers of old white male authors, because not only did we have enough of that, but I knew already that we didn't have enough money to buy any of those authors' papers. So I said, I'm going to take in papers of women authors, people of color, LGBTQA. So just by saying that, and word getting around at the con, I took in the papers of 3 female fantasy authors from the 80s and 90s, including the papers of Susan R. Matthews, a very successful military science fiction author. And then I saw that Neon Yang. So I'm a huge fan of Neon Yang, and I'm reading their work and really enjoying their work. And I see that they're at the con. Well, now I'm just so excited. And how am I going to get together with Neon Yang to talk about their papers? And as so often happens, because of what we were talking about before, the genre is changing, authors are changing, and the most popular and the most exciting authors at any big con now are these new authors who are changing the genre. And they are Neon Yang. They are definitely one of them. So everywhere I see her, she is surrounded by a huge group of fans, and I can't get anywhere close. And then I wound up behind her in line to get coffee. And I said, excuse me, I know you're very busy. I don't mean to bother you while you're getting coffee, but Pete Balestrieri, University of Iowa, we have a table upstairs in the dealer's room. If you have 5 minutes anytime during the con, please drop by and talk. I'd love to have a chance to talk to you. So when they came, the first thing I did was to say, well, let me get the business out of the way. And that's when I talked about Iowa and what Iowa has, and how their manuscripts and their work, their papers would be in good company with everything else that's here at Iowa, et cetera, et cetera. And here's what we do with what we have. And once I got through that, I said, okay, now we're done with that. Now I want to be a fanboy, and I just want to gush. And I did, and just went crazy, telling her how much I love the work, and then started talking about specific moments in one of the stories. And they couldn't believe that I'm this old librarian from a university and I know their work that well. But then I asked the question, and this is something, that Phoenix just talked about. I asked this question, do you have any papers, or is everything digital? And if everything is digital, are you using a program like Word that will allow you to track changes in the manuscript? Because if you're not, there won't be you won't have any papers. There won't be anything for anybody to study in the future. And she was there with her editor from Tor Books. And I said, do you have copies of what she's been sending you chapter by chapter? And he smiled and said, oh yeah, I do. And I said, well, please, I don't know if their papers are ever going to come to Iowa, but you need to archive all of that. You need to hang on to all of that for her, because in the future, those will be her digital papers and will provide the same kinds of research possibilities that the paper manuscripts would have. So everything that Phoenix said, that's what I do. That's what we all do. And you don't sell too hard, and chances are nowadays, because what the government did was the government, shot up the deduction that authors could receive for donating their papers. And so because there's no money there's no tax break anymore in them donating their papers to an institution, fewer and fewer authors are willing to do that. Then there's also the reality that they know that lots of authors, including science fiction authors, are selling their papers for 6 figures and sometimes 7 figures. So chances are that both small, mid-sized, and maybe even some large schools aren't going to have the money anymore to buy authors' papers. And I've been searching now for a few days for authors' papers for someone and can't find them anywhere. And they were married to another famous author, and I can't find. This is C.L. Moore. So I can't locate C.L. Moore's papers anywhere, and her husband was Henry Kuttner, and I can't find Kuttner's papers anywhere. So I don't know where they are. If anybody knows, please get in touch with me. But I've had some real serious sleuths on the case, and no one can find them. In the future, yeah, that's going to be a big problem, especially if we want science fiction to be studied the way that a serious literature is studied. If there are no authors' papers, what are you going to do?
Right. So I knew that's going to happen because we're that good in describing all the great stuff about the fanzines, and so we have several more questions. I'm going to try and consolidate a couple of them. So a little bit about non-English fanzines, if you can talk, about the diversity of the collection that you have. And also, if there are any feminist voices or anything off record that you're aware of that you can share, and a beginner's guide to fanzines. So if somebody wants to jump in and learn from you and learn from our collection, where should they begin? That can be our last question, maybe. So I apologize in advance.
Go ahead, Phoenix.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, so here at UCR, yeah, we do certainly collect non-English language fanzines. We're a huge Spanish. We have a huge Spanish speaking community here. So I have some. I'm just trying to find. We have a lot of Spanish language fanzines, specifically from Mexico, and even countries such as Peru, Latin America. So yes, and that's an area that I'm actively growing. In terms of female authored fanzines, there is this infamous fanzine called Femizine, which you might have heard of. I'll drop the link in the chat 'cause it's actually digitized on Fanac. Now, cautionary tale with this one. This was this was first issue was 54, and it was sort of touted as based in the UK. Do you know this story, Pete?
I do.
It's
Go ahead.
it's so it was the first, for femme fans of science fiction. So science fiction has been Stinky Boys Club. This is 1954. This is a women authored fan publication for women readers and fans of the genre, and founded by one Joan Carr. And Joan would write a column every issue, and there was some wild story about how she never appeared at any conventions or anything like that because she was based in Egypt, I think she said. But they had the magazine had a lot of articles, think pieces, stories from women authors, and always going great until I think it was the infamous the infamous issue 9 in 1956, where Joan Carr wrote an editorial and saying, "Surprise! I'm not really Joan Carr. I'm Sandy Sanderson, a man living somewhere in the UK, and that's why I've been hiding all this time. Sorry, he. I'm summarizing, obviously, but I hope that this has been a great boon for women fans. Blah blah blah." And then there was a new editorial, and they tried to rebrand to call themselves Distaff in the next issue, which in 1958. So there's a couple years or year hiatus, couple years hiatus. And it kept going until I think 1960, Fanac says, and then it just sort of died a death. And now I'm sure there are certainly other. Oh yeah, Crystal Genesis. That's another one. I believe that's a women-authored, primarily women-authored fanzine. So there's funny stories like that, but Femizine is an infamous example of that. And sorry, what was the last part of the question, Boaz? The non-English language Femizine.
Yeah, like introduction to the fanzines culture.
Oh.
Yeah. So
where should a novice, like a student, go?
Yeah, so Fanac and Science Fiction Encyclopedia are great sources, like Pete was saying. And this is fresh in my mind because I'm reading it right now, but it's the 2024 New Routledge Companion to Science Fiction. Books like this are a godsend for teaching because they have chapters on every single issue, every single theme, time period that we've been talking about today, fanzines, fandom, early science fiction, technology, you name it. And this is actually fantastic. And
that's the Routledge. I mean, it's excellent.
Yeah, exactly. And even though the chapters themselves are small, the bibliography and the reading lists are a really great starting point for students and researchers who might be overwhelmed with the sort of breadth of the subject.
Oxford Encyclopedia of Science Fiction, also really good, especially I think the last poor old brain, the last version, the last edition, the last edition of it. This is Black Flames. So Black Flames in 1946 is the first all-female fanzine, every contributor, every artist, everyone in here. And a lot of the famous women in science fiction fandom at the time are all featured in here. Abby Lou Ashley, Al Ashley's wife, Al and Abby were the people living at the Slan Shack, the first house devoted to science fiction fans in Battle Creek, Michigan. You've got people like Jimmy Doherty is she's Walt Doherty's wife, and she's the editor of this. But I'm trying to think of who else. Moroyo, who is actually Myrtle Douglas. So Myrtle Douglas, whose fan name was Moroyo, that was her Esperanto name because science fiction embraced Esperanto, especially the West Coast fans from Las Vegas were very into that. Myrtle Douglas had her own Esperanto fanzine called Guteto, and she also invented cosplay and created the first costumes worn to a science fiction convention, 1939, New York. She and her boyfriend, Forrest Ackerman, and she created and sewed the costumes based on characters from the film Things to Come. So yeah, I think that there is a rich history of women involved in early science fiction fandom and all through, and you just have to dig. And there are quite a few books out there that people can consult by a number of different authors. Laura Balestrieri has a great book, and then there's just so many. This whole field is just opening up in terms of people wanting to study and identify, things like race and gender, and how was that represented within science fiction fandom and the genre too. So yeah.
That's great.
I've just shared a blog post from Iowa, Pete, that talks about the femme fanzines.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
And here's something I would say, and Phoenix brought this up before. You've already at Lehigh done this really important work to identify specific characteristics of the collection. So I would say anyone that's listening that's interested in getting a beginning of coming into science fiction fandom, a beginning in studying that, you should go to Lehigh's website, look at the Lichtman, look at the resources that have already been created, and then see how that can spread out and lead you into all kinds of different areas. And again, not everybody has the history bug. And after all these years, I've made my peace with that. The majority of students who come into my classes don't have the history bug anymore. That's fine. They still love science fiction. They still want to talk about what's happening now, what's new now. Fan studies is also more devoted to the new than it is to the past. So it all makes sense. But I would start with Lehigh, and then you can't go wrong. Go to the premier collection in the country, if not the world, which is the Eaton Collection at Riverside. And again, resources have been created to help the person that comes to that place cold to be able to branch out and look into things. And Iowa, you can also come to Iowa, but
Iowa.
we haven't put as much of that online as I would like. But I'm here, and you can always get in touch with me, and I'm happy to talk to you about anything we have. Or
Yeah, that's like the most, well, definitely a byproduct of us gaining this collection, that we have access to you, and we so much appreciate your help and insight and expertise and all of that. And I know that you were generous to offer your support to anybody that's interested to know more about the topics that you talked about today. I'm so thankful for your time and your sharing today. Thank you so much. This is excellent start for us as we are journeying into this collection. And definitely, start in Lehigh, and who knows where you'll go. So really, thank you so much. And I know we'll be in touch, because to be honest, we really need the whole community around us to get us to that level of intentionality that we're all seeking. So thank you both. It was excellent. And thank you all for joining us today. Please stop in our exhibits. There's a lot of great stuff already displayed, or talk with Lois and Special Collections team about the work that we're busy doing. Love to be in touch with you all, and thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks so much. It's a great opportunity, and I love any chance I get to be with Phoenix, and I think that Lehigh's moving in some great directions, and will continue to. And good luck, best of luck. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to a podcast that you two will have. And
can you imagine, Pete? We would be going back. We'd have so many hours of content.
You're so good.
Well, I can cover the geezer. I can cover the geezer end of things, and you can cover everything that's new and prescient. So
I'll try that. It's always a pleasure, Pete. It's always a pleasure.
Always.
All right. Thank you,
Thank you so
everybody.
much, folks. Take
Have a
care.
good night. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.